barely concealed desire to preserve the image, if not the reality, of national security as an exclusively male responsibility. This irrationality is what the Equal Rights Amendment will address.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present testimony on women in the military to this subcommittee as you consider the Equal Rights Amendment. My testimony today will focus on what the consequences would be for the military if gender were not used as a basis for determining conditions of military service for individuals. Recognizing the importance of military service as both a right and a responsibility of citizenship, I will address the question of whether granting men and women equality of citizenship would interfere with the ability of our military to perform its mission. Presumably, if gender were considered irrelevant for the selection and job assignment of military personnel, then women would constitute a larger proportion of the military than they do now. They would be eligible for additional combat jobs, and if we had a military draft, they would be drafted. I will present some of the arguments that have been raised about the potential negative consequences of such a situation on military effectiveness, and evaluate those arguments on the basis of available evidence. I will not address questions of what the Equal Rights Amendment would legally require of the military, as that is not my area of expertise. However, when I have completed my testimony, I am prepared to address questions on other issues, including research on public opinion about women's military roles, the effects of military service on women, and changes in military missions, technology, and the nature of combat as they affect the potential for women's participation in the military. The major arguments against an expanded role for women in the military may be classed into two main categories: those based on presumed differences between men and women on certain individual characteristics which are related to the performance of many military jobs, and those concerned with the potential effects of women on interpersonal processes in military units which have consequences for unit performance. Individuals' levels of physical strength have consequences for the performance of many military jobs. The exclusionary argument is that since the average woman is weaker than the average man, all women should be excluded from the military, or at least from jobs seen to require physical strength, including all combat jobs. Let us look at the evidence. It is clear from research done in the military and by sports physiologists that the average young man tends to perform better than the average young woman on measures of upper body strength. It is also clear that performance is affected not only by innate capability, but also by lifelong conditioning and level of physical fitness, and can be substantially improved through training. In many training programs, the women's percentage improvement is similar to men's, and highly trained women outperform untrained men. However, since average women begin training at significantly lower levels than average men, the average performance of women after training remains lower than that of men. We can conclude that in those military jobs requiring high levels of physical strength, a smaller percentage of women than men will be capable of successful performance even after training. However, this does not support a policy of excluding all women from those jobs. If the goal in the military is to find the best fit between job requirements and individual abilities, then individuals should be selected for jobs on the basis of those abilities, not gender. Replacing gender restrictions on military job assignment with capacity to perform the job will mean that sometimes more qualified women rather than less qualified men will be assigned to the job. Thus, the job will be performed more effectively and our national security will be well served. The individual military services either already have physical strength standards for job classification or they are currently developing them. Like other job selection criteria, any such requirements must be validated by demonstrating their essential relationship to job performance. Since there are substantial differences in the proportion of men and women who can meet strict physical strength standards, such standards should be employed only if they can be objectively demonstrated to be highly predictive of individual success in the job. They should not be used as a substitute for exclusion based on gender. Perhaps most important, not all military assignments currently closed to women depend on their occupants' physical strength. For example, Navy women are permitted to perform some jobs in shore billets within the severe constraints on numbers imposed by current seashore rotations for men, but are excluded from those same jobs on ships. Similarly, individual women in the Air Force are allowed and clearly have the ability to pilot planes, but are not allowed to pilot similar planes in combat. If gender restrictions were removed, our military personnel system would be much more flexible, making our military potentially more effective, not less. Another individual trait that is related to successful performance in the military is the ability to perform under stress. In combat, this ability is critical to survival. It is sometimes assumed that women would be less capable of performing under the stress of combat than men. There is currently no evidence to substantiate such a claim. There is a great deal of evidence that American military women have performed on a par with their male peers in difficult circumstances and in situations of severe psychological pressure, including documented descriptions of the reactions of women in World War II, including those who were prisoners of war. There is also evidence that women in other countries have performed on a par with men in combat. Studies have documented the ability of American police women to cope with situations of potential and actual physical violence. Let us turn to the effects of women's presence on interpersonal relations in military units. The critical question is, how does the presence of women in previously all-male military units affect unit performance? Do women interfere with what has been referred to as male bonding? Empirical research completed to date shows basically no effect. For example, Army studies have shown that the proportion of women in combat support and combat service support units has no effect on measurable unit performance in field training exercises. Reports on the Navy's Women in Ships program indicate a high level of performance on the part of the women and acceptance by male crew members. A recent study concludes that commonality of experience is more important for group cohesion and interpersonal bonding than gender similarity. In units in combat, interpersonal interdependence is high and likely to foster cohesion, regardless of gender. The concern that women in combat units would reduce cohesion is reminiscent of arguments used in the past to justify excluding women from other occupations, such as law, medicine, police work, and firefighting. While such arguments were accepted in the past, they have now been shown to be fallacious. Concerns about interpersonal problems associated with the gender integration of the military are similar to concerns and problems that were experienced in the process of racial integration of the U.S. Armed Forces.